The first whisper rippled through the wedding hall before anyone even noticed them properly, a sharp intake of breath followed by stunned silence, the kind that feels heavier than noise. A single father walked in alone, just as he always did, except this time he wasn't alone at all. The woman beside him held his arm with quiet confidence, her smile gentle, her presence impossible to ignore. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, and when someone finally dared to ask the question about her age, the entire room froze in disbelief, because the answer shattered every assumption they had built in seconds. Before this story unfolds any further, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet courage it takes to stand beside someone when the world is ready to judge. His name was Daniel, and for most of his adult life, he had learned how to live smaller than he once dreamed. Becoming a single father at 28 had a way of doing that. The plans he had for travel, for ambition, for late nights and easy laughter, all folded inward the moment his daughter was placed in his arms and her mother walked out of their lives. He never spoke badly of her, never painted himself as a victim, but the truth was that raising a child alone carved deep lines into him that no mirror ever fully showed. He became quieter, steadier, someone who measured every decision by whether it would keep his daughter safe and loved. Years passed in a blur of school lunches, late-night homework, scraped knees, and long drives home after work. Daniel stopped attending weddings after a while, not because he resented happiness, but because those rooms were full of reminders of a life he never quite got to live. When invitations arrived, he politely declined, always citing work or childcare. People eventually stopped asking questions. They assumed he was content being alone, or perhaps broken beyond repair. Neither was entirely true. The invitation that changed everything came from an old friend, someone who had known Daniel before responsibility hardened his edges. It felt wrong to refuse again, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt a strange pull toward going. Not for the celebration, but for the quiet promise that maybe life had not closed every door yet. The problem was not whether to attend, but how. Going alone would only invite pity, the sideways glances, the unspoken assumptions that he was stuck in time. That was when Clara entered his life, not dramatically, not with sparks and declarations, but gently, like sunlight creeping across a room you forgot had windows. She lived in the same neighborhood, volunteered at the local library, and had a habit of remembering small details about people that made them feel seen. Their first conversations were about books and weather and parenting, the safe topics two guarded people choose when neither wants to risk too much. Over time, those conversations grew longer, deeper, layered with shared experiences of loss, endurance, and unexpected hope. Clara was older than Daniel, significantly so, though age had never been something she wore like a label. Life had given her its own share of battles, ones that left her wise, calm, and profoundly empathetic. She had loved deeply once, lost painfully, and rebuilt herself piece by piece without bitterness. When Daniel eventually mentioned the wedding, it was almost an afterthought, spoken with the assumption that she would politely change the subject. Instead, she suggested going with him, not as a grand gesture, but as a simple act of support. Daniel hesitated, not because he didn't want her there, but because he understood the world too well. He knew how people looked at differences they didn't understand. He knew how quickly admiration could turn into judgment. Clara saw that hesitation and met it with quiet certainty, reminding him that their presence together didn't need permission. The wedding day arrived wrapped in soft music and polished smiles. Daniel felt every step as they entered the hall, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. He was acutely aware of the space around them shifting, of conversations faltering, of eyes tracing lines that didn't match expectations. Clara walked beside him with unshaken grace, her posture relaxed, her expression warm. She was not there to prove anything, only to be present. As they moved through the crowd, greetings came with hesitation, compliments edged with confusion. Then came the question, delivered without malice but heavy with curiosity, about Clara's age. It was the kind of question people ask when they believe they are entitled to clarity, when difference makes them uncomfortable. The answer, stated plainly and without apology, sent a visible shock through the room. Murmurs followed, eyebrows lifted, and assumptions collapsed in real time. What no one in that hall knew was how much courage it had taken for Daniel to stand there. They didn't see the nights he lay awake wondering if he deserved happiness again. They didn't know how often he had chosen solitude over judgment, or how deeply he feared exposing someone he cared about to the same scrutiny. They also didn't know that Clara had spent years being underestimated, reduced to a number instead of the life she carried within her. As the evening unfolded, something remarkable began to happen. The initial shock softened into curiosity, then into understanding. People noticed the way Clara listened when Daniel spoke, the way he relaxed around her, the subtle exchange of glances that spoke of mutual respect rather than performance. They saw how she laughed with his daughter, not trying to replace anyone, simply offering warmth. Slowly, the room adjusted, not because everyone suddenly agreed, but because it became impossible to deny the authenticity of what stood before them. Daniel felt a shift within himself too. For the first time in years, he wasn't bracing for impact. He wasn't apologizing with his posture or shrinking under scrutiny. He stood taller, grounded in the realization that his life did not need to fit anyone else's expectations to be valid. The wedding, meant to celebrate one kind of love, became the backdrop for another kind entirely, one built on resilience, patience, and the bravery to choose joy when it feels risky. As the night drew on, the music softened, and the lights dimmed into something intimate and forgiving. Daniel watched his daughter laugh freely, her hand comfortably resting in Clara's, and felt something inside him loosen. He understood then that love did not always arrive wrapped in familiar packaging. Sometimes it came later, quieter, asking not for grand gestures but for honesty and courage. The age question that stunned everyone had done more than expose prejudice, it had revealed how shallow assumptions could be, and how deeply wrong. It forced a room full of people to confront the fact that connection does not follow rules written by strangers. It follows truth, shared values, and the willingness to stand together when the world is watching. Near the end of the evening, Daniel found himself overwhelmed, not by fear, but by gratitude. Gratitude for the years that shaped him, for the struggles that taught him empathy, for the woman who walked beside him without asking him to be anything other than himself. He realized that being a single father had not disqualified him from love, it had prepared him for a deeper version of it. If this story is stirring something in you, if it reminds you of a moment when you judged or were judged, or of a time you chose courage over comfort, take a moment to engage with this video. Like it, share it, and let others feel this story too, because these are the stories that remind us what humanity looks like when we slow down and really see each other. Just before this story ends, there is one special request. Comment below with your thoughts, your experiences, or simply a word that reflects how this story made you feel. Your voice matters more than you might realize. As Daniel and Clara left the wedding that night, hand in hand, the whispers had faded, replaced by something quieter and far more powerful. Acceptance does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives as silence, as understanding, as the simple act of letting people live their truth without interference. Under the night sky, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years, not because the world had changed, but because he had stopped asking it for permission. And in that quiet freedom, surrounded by love that defied expectations, he knew that the most stunning thing of all was not her age, but the courage it took to choose happiness anyway.